in a baby annual allowance in the Derbyshire County Records Office. There exists an annual about the boy of 1111, a case that has afflicted historians and abstruse advisors for added than a century. The photograph shows 8-year-old Elias Graves sitting at his father's board in the ancestor's clockmaking shop, captivation a abridged watch in his hands, his anemic face staring anon at the camera with the announcement that would afterwards acquire him the name, the boy of 111. The boy's name was Elias Graves. The photograph was taken on October 3, 1885 in the parlor of the Graves ancestors' home in the Apple of Ashbourne, Derbyshire. It would be the aftermost photograph any time taken of him, absolutely. 27 canonical afterwards, this angel was captured. Elias Graves vanished from his bound bedchamber at absolutely 11:11 p.m. and was never apparent again. But what makes this case absolutely advancing is not artlessly that a adolescent disappeared. It's what happened during the 27 nights arch up to that final vanishing, an arrangement of cool contests that was anxiously accurate by his father, witnessed by assorted above-board observers, and advised by bounded authorities who could acquisition no rational explanation. This is the adventure of a boy who began every night at absolutely the aforementioned moment. Ceremony time abiding, from a abode he could not call until the night he abolished and never came back. To accept the abhorrence of what happened to Elias Graves, we charge aboriginal, except the apple he lived in, and the ancestors that approved badly to save him. Victorian England in 1885 was an association congenital on order, precision, and rationality. The automated anarchy had adapted Britain into the world's best avant-garde nation. Science was acknowledgement mysteries that had puzzled altruism for centuries. The age of superstition, abounding believed, was assuredly advancing to an end. Ashbourne was archetypal bizarre boondocks in Derbyshire with a citizenry of about 3,000, located in the Peak District. It was an affluent association of merchants, craftsmen, and farmers. The boondocks was appreciative of its medieval church, its advancing marketplace, and its growing acceptability as a centermost of affection, craftsmanship. The Graves ancestors lived on Abbey Artery in a well-maintained Georgian townhouse that had been in the ancestors for 2 generations. The abode was 3 believe alpine with a branch on the arena floor, active abode on the additional floor, and bedrooms on the 3rd floor. Henry Graves, Elias's father, was an admired alarm and watchmaker. His branch on Abbey Artery was accepted throughout Derbyshire for the affection and attention of his work. Henry had abstrused the barter from his own ancestor and had spent 20 years perfecting his craft. He repaired aggregate from abridged watchers to the admirable belfry clocks in bounded churches. His wife Margaret Graves came from ancestors of academy agents and was accepted in the association for her apprenticeship and refinement. She managed the domiciliary accounts, volunteered at the Archdiocese's church, and was teaching adolescent Elias to apprehend and address at a kin far aloft his years. Elias was there, abandoned child. Margaret had suffered 2 miscarriages afore. Elias was built in 1877, and the doctors had told her she would accept a bobuck, no added children. This fabricative Elias adored a lofted measurement to his parents. By all accounts, Elias was a normal, healthy, able boy. His babysittery at the Apple School, Mr. Richard Pionton, would afterwards affirm that Elias was bright, curious, and well-behaved. An archetypal apprentice with an accurate bent for mathematics and reading. Elias admired spending time in his father's workshop, watching Henry adjustment the intricate mechanisms of clocks and abridged watchers. The boy had developed an allure with timepieces and their complete movements. Henry had a lycomorphous teaching him the basics of the craft. Assertive that one day Elias would booty over the ancestors' business. The abode itself would become acute to compassionate what happened. Henry Graves, as befitted his profession, had abounding the home with clocks. There were 23 timepieces incomplete throughout the 3 floors. Grandfathering clocks, mantel clocks, bank clocks, and abridged watchers on display. All were kept in complete alive order, all synchronized to the exact time. The abode was abounding with the connected, active, and alternate agreeable of complete time. It was this attraction with Benazic attention that would accomplish the contest of October 1885, so cool to abolish or explain away. The aboriginal adventure occurred on the night of October 4, 1885. Absolutely 1 day afterwards the photograph was taken. Margaret Graves recorded the accident in her acclaimed diary, which was afterwards submitted as affirmation to the bounded magistrate. Her access for October 5 reads, "Something actual aberrant occurred after most night, that I cannot absolutely explain. At some point afterwards we had all retired. I accept it was accomplished at 11 o'clock. I was alive by a sound. It was the complete of footsteps in the hallway, ablaze and quick. Thinking Elias had gotten up to use the alcove pot, I waited a moment, but the footsteps continued, actualization to clip a back and forth." Margaret continues, "I rose and went to investigate. Back I opened our bedchamber door. The alley was empty. Puzzled, I went to Elias's allowance and opened the door. His bed was empty, my affection bedeviled with worry. I ledged for Henry and calm, we searched the house. We activate Elias in the parlor, continuing in advance of the grandfathering alarm, staring at it. He was in his nightshirt, barefoot, and appeared to be in some array of trance. Back? Henry afflicted his shoulder. Elias started berserk as if alive from abysmal sleep. He seemed abashed and disoriented. Back, we asked him, what he was accomplishing downstairs. He said he didn't bethink abrogation his room. He said the aftermost affair he remembered was lying in his bed, aggravating to abatement asleep. We afflicted he had been sleepwalking, admitting he had never done so before. Henry and Margaret put Elias back to bed in anticipation, little added of it. Sleepwalking, while concerning, was not aberrant in children. They bound to accumulate his bedchamber, aperture bound at night to anticipate any accidents. But the abutting night, October 5th, it happened again. This time, Henry was the one who apparent to Elias missing. He had been alive astern in his branch, and was branch admiral to bed aback. He noticed a blaze beneath the aperture of the study. Allowance, they rarely acclimated at night. Tore the door. Activate Elias, continuing by the window. Again, actualization to be in a trance-like state. Henry acclaimed article that abashed him. The abstraction aperture had been bankrupt. Back he came upstairs, and Elias had to accessible it to enter. This appropriate akin of bent movement and consistent with archetypal sleepwalking. Back, Henry woke Elias, the boy afresh. I had no anamnesis of abrogation his bed. But this time, Elias said article that Henry recorded in his own journal. Papa was about cold the third night, October 6th. They bound Elias's bedchamber aperture from the outside, befitting the key with them. Both Henry and Margaret were bent to anticipate edition episode. At breakfast on October 7th, Margaret asked Elias if he had slept well. Elias nodded, but afresh said article that I'll jitter. I didn't leave my room, Mama, but I still went somewhere. Back apprentice to explain. Elias became abashed and couldn't ablaze what he meant. But Margaret acclaimed in her annual that he seemed abashed by article he couldn't absolutely bethink or understand. That night, October 7th, they afresh bound Elias's door. Margaret arrested him at 9 o'clock and activate him sleeping peacefully. Henry arrested afresh at 10:30. The aperture was still locked, and through the keyhole he could see Elias in his bed. But at some point afterwards, 11 o'clock, Margaret was alive. By a complete she would call his alarm striking, but amiss somehow. The Angelus were discordant, jarring. She woke Henry, and calm they got up to investigate. As they stepped into the hallway, they heard it. Footsteps advancing from downstairs. Light, quick footsteps, a child's footsteps. Henry rushed to a light door. It was still locked. He fumbled with the key, his icily shaking, and threw accessible the door. The bed was empty. They activate Elias in the kitchen, continuing in complete darkness, staring at the wall. Aback they lit a lamp. They saw that he was algidity, violently, admitting the night was not decidedly cold. His anxiety were dirty, as if he had been walking outside, yet all the doors and windows were bound from the inside. His time aback, they woke him. Elias began to cry. I don't appetite to go aback. There, he sobbed. I don't appetite to go back. Go back where? Margaret asked. Captivation him close. The Alged place. Elias whispered. The abode area addition is counting. It was the afterward morning, October 8th, that Henry fabricated an analysis that would transform their affair into terror. As he was advancing to access up his workshop, he noticed that several of the clocks in the abode had stopped. This was unusual. Henry prided himself on befitting every time allotment in complete, alive order. He arrests the ceremony alarm, anxiously inactivate that bristles of them broadcast throughout the abode on adapted floors set all chock full at absolutely the aforementioned time. 11:11, Henry was troubled, but afflicted their charge. Be some explanation? Conceivably abrupt change in temperature or air burden that had afflicted the mechanisms. He, anguish, and displaced ceremony alarm carefully. But that night, October 8th, article far added advancing, occurred. Margaret and Henry absolutely to breach alive and accumulate watch. They positioned themselves in the additional attic alley from area they could see Elias's bound bedchamber door. They took turns watching, then to accept what was accident to their son. At 11:09 p.m., all was quiet. Elias was in his bed. They had arrested moments before. The abode was still, except for the connected active clocks. At 11:10 p.m., Margaret noticed article strange. The active seemed to be slowing down, not all at once, but gradually, as if the clocks were all in Beja's bottomward simultaneously. At 11:11 p.m., every alarm in the abode chock-full ticking. The blackout was complete and acutely unsettling. Henry and Margaret looked at ceremony added in confusion. Before either could speak, they heard it. The complete of Elias's aperture opening, but the aperture didn't open. They stared at it. The aperture remained bankrupt and locked. Yet they could acutely apprehend the complete of a aperture opening, a fresh closing, and a fresh footsteps bottomward the stairs. Henry affected the lamp and rushed bottomward to the aboriginal floor. Margaret followed, her affection pounding. They searched every allowance on the arena floor. Elias was boilerplate to be found. Then, at absolutely 11:14 p.m., 3 annual afterward, the clocks had stopped. They heard a complete from the third floor, footsteps walking boring aloft to the floorboards. They raced to back upstairs, accomplished the additional attic to the third. Attic bedrooms, Elias's aperture was still locked. Henry afar it with afraid as solely, and threw it open. Elias was in his bed, lying on his back, staring at the ceiling. His eyes were open, but he didn't assume to see them. His nightshirt was clammy with perspiration, and his bark was algid to the touch. "Elias!" Margaret cried, hasty to him. Slowly Elias's eyes focused on his mother's face. He blinked several times as if alive from abysmal sleep. "Mama," he said, his articulation baby and confused. "Where did I go?" "You were here," Henry said firmly, admitting his articulation shook. "You were in your bed. You never larboard your room." "But I wasn't here," Elias insisted, and he began to cry. "How's about else? I was in the Algeta boat again. An addition was there. Addition was counting 1, 2, 3, 4. They kept counting. And Mama, I anticipate they were counting nights." At absolutely that moment, 11:15 p.m., every alarm in the abode began active again, simultaneously, altogether synchronized. Henry arrested them all. The abutting morning. All again. Several had chock-full at absolutely 11:11 p.m. It was at this point that Henry and Margaret Graves accomplished. They were ambidextrous, with article aloft their understanding. They absively to seek help. Margaret's sister, Beatrice Caldwell, accustomed from Nottingham on October 10th. Margaret had accounting to her anecdotic, the events admitting she had been accurate, not to complete agitated or irrational. Beatrice was a applied woman, a added who had aloft 3 accouchement on her own. If anyone could accommodate a live admonition and support, it was she. Beatrix's testimony, accustomed afterwards to investigators, provides an alfresco angle on what was accident in the Graves household. "I accustomed at my sister's home assured to acquisition a case of adolescence night terrors or conceivably some anatomy of sleepwalking," Beatrice testified. "Margaret and Henry are not cool people. They are sober, rational individuals, but I could see they were absolutely abashed by what had been occurring." Beatrice agreed to beam Elias during the day and breach alive with Margaret and Henry at night. During the daytime, she'll activate Elias to be a altogether normal, advantageous child. He played, ate well, abounding his lessons, and showed no signs of adversity or ache except a back. The accountable of colligiosity came up. A back, black approached. Beatrice noted. Elias would become quiet and withdrawn. He didn't appetite to go to bed. He begged his parents to let him breach up later, to let him Betty by in their room. Annihilation to abstain, actuality abandoned, aback the alarm addled. 11, on the night of October 10th. Beatrice witnessed the abnormality herself. She, Margaret, and Henry positioned themselves in adapted genitalia of the abode to ensure abounding observation. Beatrice stationed herself al fresco Elias's bound bedchamber door. Margaret was on the arena floor. Henry was in the branch area. He had a blaze actualization of the anteroom alarm and several added timepieces. At 11:09 p.m., Beatrice heard the clocks activate too slow. By 11:10 p.m., the active had become lethargic, like a baby, boring stomping. At 11:11 p.m., silence. And afresh, Beatrice heard article that fabricated her claret, run cold. From Central. Elias's bound allowance came the complete of movement. Not footsteps, but a complete, she declared, as a displacement of air, like a abrupt wind central, a bankrupt space. She apprenticed her ear to the aperture and alleged out. "Elias, are you all right?" No response. She fumbled for the key, afar at the door, and threw it open. The bed was empty. The window was bankrupt and latched from the inside. There was no added way out of the room. Beatrix's affidavit continues. "I stood there in shock, staring at the abandoned bed. The allowance was cold, far colder than it should have been. I could see my animation misting in the lamplight. And afresh I heard Margaret scream from downstairs. Beatrice ran bottomward to the arena attic and activate Margaret in the scullery at the back of the house. She was staring at Elias, who was continuing in the bend adverse the bank absolutely still. He, aloof, appeared, Margaret said, her articulation shaken. I was attractive at that bend one moment, and it was empty. I glanced abroad for aloof, additional, and aback. I looked back. He was there. He, aloof, appeared out of nothing. Aback they approached Elias and angry him around. They activate, his eyes were closed, but he was blurred article afresh beneath his breath. Beatrice leaned abutting to hear. 27, 26, 25, 24. He was counting backwards. Back. They woke him. Elias was adrift and frightened. His bark was ice cold, and there were what appeared to be frost marks on his bald feet. as if he had been walking in snow. But there was no snow anywhere in or about the house. At 11:14 p.m., the clocks began active again, altogether synchronized. And 3 added clocks had Arctic at 11:11, the abutting morning. October 11th, Henry Graves fabricated a decision. He went to see Dr. Lawrence Fletcher, the town's physician, and told him aggregate that had been happening. Henry brought his abundant journals, which accurate ceremony adventure with the attention one would apprehend from an adept alarm maker. Dr. Fletcher agreed to appraise Elias and beam the household. His medical report, preserved in the Derbyshire County Archives, provides an analytic angle on the case. I advised the adolescent thoroughly. Dr. Fletcher wrote, Elias Graves is in acceptable concrete health. His baby is regular, his lungs are clear, and he shows no signs of epilepsy, fever, or added medical altitude that ability to explain episodes of asleep or adapted brainy states. However, I agended that the adolescent appears afraid and sleep-deprived, which is barefaced accustomed to the advancing attributes of his experiences. Dr. Fletcher agreed to absorb the night of October 11th at the Graves domiciliary to beam what happened at 11:11 p.m. that evening. Dr. Fletcher positioned himself in Elias's room, sitting in an armchair beside the boy's bed. Henry, Margaret, and Beatrice stationed themselves at assorted credibility in the house. They had additionally arrived Abbé Albert Morrison, the rector of St. Oswald's Church, to be present. The abbey had accepted the ancestors for years and had agreed to action whatever area abutment ability be needed. At 11:09 p.m., Dr. Fletcher acclaimed in his report, the act of the domiciliary clocks began to apathetic noticeably. This is a alleged concrete phenomenon, not a abstract impression. At 11:10 p.m., the slowing of the clocks continues. Adolescent Elias, who had been sleeping peacefully, begins to actualization signs of distress. His breath becomes accelerated and shallow. He begins to grumble in his sleep. At 11:11 p.m., all clocks stop, complete silence. At this exact moment, Elias Graves vanished from his bed. Dr. Fletcher's affidavit is decidedly admired because of its analytic precision. I was sitting beneath and 3 feet from the child. I was attractive anon at him. There was no movement, no sound, no agitation of any kind. Amid one moment, and the next, the adolescent artlessly accomplished to be there. The bed showed the consequence area he had been lying. The blankets were still disturbed, but the boy himself had vanished, as if he had never existed. I anon stood and advised the allowance thoroughly. The aperture was bound from the inside. I had the key. The window was latched. There was no accessible way the adolescent could accept larboard the allowance by any accustomed means. Yet, he was gone. For 3 minutes, the abode was in anarchy as anybody searched for Elias. Then, at 11:14 p.m., they heard a complete from the attic. An amplitude aloft, the 3rd attic, that was acclimated abandoned for accumulator and rarely accessed. Henry and Dr. Fletcher climbed the attenuated stairs to the attic. They activate Elias, lying on the attic unconscious, his anatomy covered in an attenuated band of frost that broiled as they watched. Aback they brought him bench and active him. Elias was about coherent. He kept repeating, I saw them counting. They're counting down. They're counting the nights. Who is counting? Dr. Fletcher asked gently. The bodies in the Alged place, Elias whispered. There are so abounding of them, and they all appetite to appear back. At this point Abbé Morrison stepped advanced and asked Elias, come aback from where? Child, Elias looked at the abbey with tears, Elias bottomward his face. From aback, they got lost, like I'm accepting lost. And they said, I'm about ready. They said, when the accomplishment counting, I can breach with them. That night, afterward, Elias had assuredly collapsed into an beat sleep. The adults aggregate in the parlor to altercate what they had witnessed. Dr. Fletcher, a man of science, was visibly shaken. I cannot explain what I observed, he told them. The boy vanished from a bound allowance and reappeared in an absolutely adapted location, casseroled through solid floors and walls. This defies every accustomed law, yet I saw it with my own eyes. Abbé Morrison appropriated they were ambidextrous with article airy, or demonic. That conceivably the abode was accursed or Elias was actuality afflicted by angry spirit. He offered to accomplish an absolution of the abode and to adjure over Elias. But Henry Graves, staring at his apoplectic clocks, had a adapted theory, one that he about dared to voice. What if, he said slowly, this has article to do with time itself? Every adventure occurs at absolutely 11:11. The clocks stop. Elias vanishes and reappears. He speaks of counting. What if article is accident to time at that specific moment? What if Elias is somehow falling out of time? The others stared at him. The abstraction was absurd, and yet annihilation a broad, fabricated faculty. Either, the afterward canicule brought added incidents. Ceremony added, advancing than the last. The arrangement was consistent. Every night at absolutely 11:11 p.m., Elias would vanish from wherever he was and reappear abroad in the house. The disappearances lasted absolutely 3 minutes, and with ceremony night, Elias alternating colder, added confused, and added frightened. On October 14th, Elias was activated in the basement, continuing in complete darkness. His aperture blew from cold. On October 16th, he was apparent in the bound workshop, amidst by disassembled clocks that he had allegedly taken afar with cool attention while in his trance-like state. On October 19th, he was activated on the roof, continuing at the actual edge, and would accept collapsed if Henry hadn't effective him aloof in time. Ceremony time, Elias would acknowledgement with the aforementioned message. They're still counting. The cardinal was accepting smaller. By October 20th, Elias had become abashed of nightfall. He would beg his parents to accumulate him awake, to not let him sleep, to somehow anticipate 11 to 11 from coming. But no amount what they tried, as the clocks approached that acute moment. Elias would abatement into a sleep-like accompaniment, from which he couldn't be roused. Mistodi Shardbeat, Elias's academy teacher, provided affidavit about the boy's deterioration. Elias Chalkful Accessory Academy afterwards October 15th. Back I visited the Graves home to analyze about his absence. I was abashed by his appearance. The bright, active boy I knew had become pale, hollow-eyed, and jumpy. He abashed at every sound. He kept attractive at the clocks throughout the abode with an announcement of complete dread. Mrs. Dorothy Hartley, an acquaintance who lived 3 doors bottomward on Abbey Street, additionally provided testimony. The absolute adjacency new article abhorrent was accident at the Graves house. We could apprehend Margaret errant during the day. We saw Dr. Fletcher advancing and going every night at aloof afterwards 11 o'clock. We would apprehend sounds, aberrant sounds, like wind hasty through a bankrupt amplitude or a aperture slamming admitting no aperture had moved. On October 24th, article new occurred. Elias, during his alive hours, began to allege about the Aljet abode, with added accuracy and detail. So like here, but not here, he told his mother, as Margaret recorded in her diary. Everything is the same. The aforementioned houses, the aforementioned streets, the aforementioned church, but there's no one there. It's abandoned, and algid, and silent. And aback I'm there, I can see things. I can see advance and backward. I can see nights that haven't happened yet. Aback Margaret asked what he meant by seeing forward. Elias said article that I'll jitter to the bone. I can see the night aback I don't appear back. I can see you and Papa attractive for me. I can see the abandoned bed, and I can see all the bodies in the Aljed place. And they're not counting anymore because they've accomplished one. Margaret begged him to explain, but Elias couldn't or wouldn't say more. He had amorphous to cry, and wouldn't stop until Henry captivated him, abutting and promised that they would acquisition a way to stop this. But Henry Graves, for all his accomplishment with mechanisms and precision, with Sabanya joined whatever force was affairs his son abroad. Little edit ceremony night. On October 28th, aloof 3 Canicula 4 the final disappearance. Henry aggregate every alarm in the house, all 23 timepieces, and burst them. He destroyed his life's work, his best adored possessions, in an atrocious attack to breach whatever affiliation existed amid time and his son's affliction. It fabricated no difference. At 11:11 p.m. that night, Elias still vanished. In a back he alternate 3 annual later, actualization in the parlor area the grandfathering alarm had already stood. He looked at the abandoned amplitude and said, "It doesn't matter, Papa, they're not counting with our clocks. They counted with article older." The night of October 30th, 1885 was alged and clear. A autumn moon afraid abounding in the sky. The absolute domiciliary was awake. Henry, Margaret, Beatrice, Dr. Fletcher, and Abby Morrison. They had all agreed to accumulate acuity through this night, bent to anticipate whatever was activity to happen. Elias had spent the day in an accompaniment of addled dread. He had about eaten, about spoken. Abeck Margaret asked him how he felt. He artlessly said, "They've accomplished 3, Mama. Afterwards tonight. There are abandoned 2 nights left, and afresh it will be my about face to stay." At 11:12 p.m., they aggregate in Elias's room. The boy was lying in bed, captivation his mother's hand. Henry sat on the added ancillary captivation his son's added hand. They were bent that whatever happened, they would not let go. As 11:10 approached Elias's anchor on his parents, easily tightened. "It's starting," he whispered. "I can feel it, affairs at me." Margaret and Henry captivated on Tita. Beatrice, Dr. Fletcher, and Abby Morrison formed an amphitheater about the bed. Ceremony agreement A. Duke on Elias. At 11:11 p.m., the affair's awareness became overwhelming. Anybody in the allowance acquainted it, a force aggravating to breach. Elias abroad from them. Margaret screamed abnegation to let go. Henry captivated on with all his strength. And then, for aloof a moment, article cool occurred. As they fought to authority onto Elias, the actual air in the allowance seemed to blinking and distort. Dr. Fletcher Wood afterwards affirmed that he saw for aloof ahead him of a glimpse of about else, a gray, abandoned abode that looked like the allowance they were in, but wasn't. A abode area added abstracts, stood, clear-cut and waiting. The affair's force intensified. Elias screamed in a fresh, with a weirdness-like article advancing. He was yanked abroad from them. His anatomy vanished from the bed, admitting Margaret and Henry's still-acquainted apparition. Grip's area his Isily had been a moment before. The awareness lasted abandonné, additional, and afresh. It was gone. The allowance was empty. Elias was gone. For 3 annual they searched the abode in growing panic. But at 11:14 p.m., there came no complete of Elias reappearing. The 3 annual passed, afresh for minutes, afresh 5. Elias did not return. They searched through the night and into the abutting day. They searched the house, the garden, the street, the absolute apple abutting in the search. But Elias Graves was boilerplate to be found. On October 31st, 1885, the night Elias had said would be the final countdown, Henry Graves sat abandoned in his workshop. About him were the burst charcoal of 23 clocks. At 11:11 p.m., he heard actual faintly the complete of a articulation he knew. 1. It was Elias's articulation actualization to appear from boilerplate. And everywhere at once, aloof that distinct chat and a fresh silence. Elias Graves never returned. No trace of him was any time found. The bounded authorities advised thoroughly, apprehensive kidnapping, or abhorrent play, but activate no affirmation of any crime. The case was eventually classified as an alien disappearance. The Graves ancestors never recovered. Margaret suffered a complete afraid breakdown and was institutionalized briefly, afore affected to alive with Beatrice and Nottingham. Henry bankrupt his branch and never formed as alarm maker again. He died in 1889. 4 years afterwards, disappearance of what the afterlife affidavit alleged, a decline, about a burst heart. The abode on Abbey Archery stood abandoned for 7 years, afore it was assuredly sold. The new owners appear no abnormal phenomena, admitting they did agenda that clocks kept in the abode tended to stop or malfunction with abnormal frequency. Abandoned concrete affirmation that charcoal of Elias Graves is the photograph taken on October 3rd, 1885. One day, before the aboriginal disappearance, in the image 8-year-old Elias stands beside the grandfathering alarm in the parlor, staring at the camera with those alive eyes. And if you're attending actual carefully at the alarm face in the photograph, you can see that the Isly are positioned at absolutely 11:11. In the decades back Elias's disappearance, advisors attempted to acquisition rational explanations for what happened. Some accept appropriate that Elias suffered from an attenuate anatomy of attack that acquired beat states, and that he wandered abroad during one such adventure and died of acknowledgement about in the countryside. Others propose that the absolute ancestors suffered from aggregate delusion, possibly acquired by carbon monoxide contagion from adulterated heating systems. A not aberrant accident in Victorian homes. But these explanations attempt to annul for the affidavit of alfresco assemblage like Dr. Fletcher, who empiric Elias vanishing from a bound room, or Mrs. Hartley, who heard the aberrant sounds every night at the aforementioned time. For best advancing approach comes from Professor David Winters, a historian specializing in Victorian-era disappearances. In his 1964 book Abzan Accouchement of the Victorian Age, Winters accurate 17 cases of accouchement who vanished beneath abnormal affairs amid 1880 and 1899. Of those 17 cases, 11 complex disappearances that occurred at specific alternating times. 7 complex clocks endlessly or malfunctioning. In bristles included affidavit from ancestors' associates that the accusement had announced of actuality, about abroad or of bodies counting. What if, Winters wrote, we are ambidextrous, not with 17 abstracted incidents, but with 17 manifestations of the aforementioned phenomenon? What if at assertive moments and assertive places the barrier amid our time and some added time becomes attenuate abundant that accessible individuals, decidedly children, can blooper through? Winters's book was absolved by boilerplate historians, by speculation, but its charcoal accepted amid those who abstraction alien disappearances. Today, the photograph of Elias Graves can be beheld by arrangement at the Derbyshire County Records Office. Those who accept apparent in being address activity acutely active by it, admitting they attempt to ablaze why. Some say it's the boy's eyes, the way he seems to be attractive not at the camera, but through it, that article beyond. Others point to his expression, which seems to accommodate both abhorrence and resignation, as if he knows what is coming. And there are those who affirmation that if you beam at the photograph continued enough, you can see article in the background, a aside blinking in the air beside the clock, like a amount about there, but not quite. Like addition continuing in the Alged place, attractive apicatus from about alfresco of time. The abode on Abbey Artery still stands, admitting it has been adapted, abounding times over the years. Current association address no abnormal phenomena, but Bounded Fable maintains that if you angle al fresco, the abode at absolutely 11:11 p.m. on October 30th, the ceremony of Elias's final disappearance, you can sometimes apprehend a sound, a side articulation, like a child's counting backwards from a cardinal abandon. He knows. 3, 2, 1, and a fresh silence. The case of Elias Graves charcoal, one of the best thoroughly accurate anatomic explained disappearances in British history. We accept assorted witnesses, medical testimony, and abundant journals recording the progression of cool events. We accept a photograph that serves as a final addictive admonition of a boy who was there one moment and gone the next. What we don't accept is an acknowledgement to the catechism that apparitional Henry and Margaret Graves for the blow of their lives. Ario, did Elias go back? He vanished at 11:11? What was the Algida Bodhi described? Who were the Bodhis counting? Bottom were the knights. And best advancing of all, are they still counting? Are there still moments? Aback, time grows thin. Aback, the barrier amid our apple in that cold, abandoned abode, becomes permeable. Are there still accouchements, who ability blooper through one dematerialization at a set time at absolutely the aforementioned moment every night? The photograph offers no answers. Idabanya shows us a boy continuing beside a clock, staring at article we cannot see in the moment. A 4. He began his 27-night adventure into impossibility. And if you any time acquisition yourself alive at night and casual at your clock, and if it reads absolutely 11:11, you ability appetite to abutting your eyes, bound and delay for the moment to pass. Because according to those who abstraction the Elias Graves case, that moment, that specific alignment of hours and minutes, may be added then aloof, a cardinal on a alarmed face. It may be a doorway, an article on the added ancillary may still be counting. If this adventure has larbordu analytic, the attributes of time, and the attenuate boundaries amid our apple and places we cannot see, subscribe to our approach for added accurate cases from history's darkest archives. Hit the notification alarm because we never apperceive a Bach. The abutting cool case will apparent to admonish us that absoluteness is far drifter and far added alarming than we cartel to imagine, until abutting time, bethinks sometimes the moments. We anticipate our accustomed maybe ambuscade article extraordinary, and sometimes what disappears at the 11th of May not be coming back.